Hi, this is Robert Staten, and I'm doing a video on Emily Dickinson and her unique worldview. Emily Dickinson may have not traveled the world and visited many cultures, but she did travel deep in her mind to create some of the greatest poetry in American history. She grew up in a very religious family. Her father and mother wanted her to follow them in the way they believed. But Emily, I think, was torn by a lot of the scientific facts that were coming out at the time versus the way the Bible said things were. And I think this created some conflicts with Emily. And I think you see that in her poetry. She did believe, but I think you would call her more progressive in her beliefs. The institution of marriage, she really didn't believe in that either. According to the poetryfoundation.org, Emily's views on marriage were not common for those times. I mean, everyone got married, had children, had families. She just didn't see this as where she wanted to go with her life. She felt like her mother, she watched some of her friends, and she didn't feel like the women were getting a fair shake in the relationship. So she never got married. She did have boyfriends, acquaintances, I guess you would say. But throughout her life, she lived at her parents' house, never getting married. Even though she did spend all this time at home, this only increased her imagination and her awareness internally to help her with her writings. Some of the poets that she enjoyed were Robert Browning, Sir Thomas Browne, and novels by George Eliot and Charlotte and Emily Bronte. These influences, along with the Bible, helped shape her poetry. It wasn't until the 20th century even that she started getting the recognition for her poetry. Anne Woodliff of Virginia Commonwealth University suggests Dickinson's poetry is challenging because it's radical and original, and its rejection of most traditional 19th century themes and techniques. Her poems require active engagement from the reader because she seems to leave out so much with her elliptical style and remarkable contrasting metaphors. But these apparent gaps are filled with meaning if we were sensitive to her use of devices such as personification, allusion, symbolism, and startling syntax and grammar. I mean, these are things that you've seen in her poetry. When you read it, you see it. As I read her poetry, it took several times for me to get the meanings. And sometimes I'm not sure that they were clear then, but I would do research to make sure what I was getting was her meaning. Her style was truly American. It was original, personal, free of outside influence. I reviewed a couple of her poems in my paper, one being This World Is Not Conclusion, and then another one that is called Wild Nights. It kind of gives you both sides of her. The World Is Not Conclusion is not a conclusion is a very interesting poem that leaves a reader with questions around faith and belief. The poems ask questions that all societies have, such as what is really waiting for humankind and in the afterlife, and the struggle to remain faithful to the religious life. The World Is Not a Conclusion states Emily's beliefs that our life on earth is just the beginning. She doesn't really state what she thinks the next life is, but she does state there is a next life. She does talk about how many try to determine the afterlife through this poem, but we really don't know. None of us know. And she makes that clear. And even though many people, martyrs, those that died in the name of God, that people still struggle with belief and faith. And you see this in her poem. I like the couple of lines I'd like to say. Plucks at a twig of evidence and asks a vain the way. These are things where she's hinting that she'd like to know, what is the afterlife like? The last four lines of the poem really roll off the tongue and complete the poem's meaning. Let me read this. Much gesture from the pulpit pulpit. Strong hallelujahs roll. Narcotics cannot steal the tooth that nibbles at the soul. These 4 lines are written with even meter and rhyme, and through a metaphor about an aching tooth, it compares to a sermon and a rallying for faith in church and humankind, but still having doubt about God's existence. So we go to church, we're all excited, we get into it, and then we go home and we start living our lives, and maybe not living them in a godly way. Her other poem, a good example of the other side of Emily, is Wild Nights. Wild nights, were I with thee. Wild nights should be our luxury. Futile the winds to a heart in port, done with the compass, done with the chart. Rowing in Eden, awe the sea. Might I be more tonight in thee. This poem is a desire to reunite with your lover. And once they've reunited, they no longer need to search for each other. The imagery is of an erotic nature. And so you get to see a side of Emily that you may not see in a lot of her other poems. Emily Dickinson's poetry is deep in meaning. Every line must be read very carefully, and I assure you I did. Looking at the grammar and syntax helps bring out the message with her poetry. You have to look at each line. You have to look at the syntax. A lot of nouns in some of her poems are uppercase. They truly are American in her poetry. As I said, independent. She's not afraid to express her thoughts and her feelings. I feel like her worldview was just like her poetry, sometimes difficult to contemplate. But if you look closely, you'll find the meaning, which is faith-based, but not in the traditional sense of those times. It's more progressive. So I really enjoyed reading her poetry. I at first didn't think I would, but I took the time to study it, analyze it, and found it very informative. And I learned a lot about Emily, and I learned a lot about myself. Thank you.